join us today, and we are excited to be here. And each month, Best Missouri Hands tries to put on some kind of professional development workshop that to help our members. And today we're going to be covering art fairs, tips and tricks and all those kind of good things. Some of you have been doing shows for years. Others are just kind of getting started out, but I will tell you what, I'm always learning, and this is definitely a great group to learn from. Wanda Tyner is on the board of the Best Missouri Hands. She's been doing shows for a while, and I think she's got some good things to share with us. Everybody on here, Molly's been doing shows forever. I know Carol has, Pat has, and stuff. Um, you know, Feel free to jump in and give your advice too, and things that have helped you along the way and stuff. So, welcome everybody. I'm going to let Wanda start it off. Also, Annie Webster is on here. She's president of the Best Missouri Hands. Wonderful lady, has done a fantastic job for our organization and stuff. And we've got Pat Barkbigler on here. She's on the board also. So it's nice to see everybody. And Wanda, and jump in if you got questions. Go ahead and jump in then, so that you don't forget it, because we will stop and address your questions as best as we can. Somebody on here is going to have an answer for you, and if we don't, we will find an answer and post it. And Nancy Brickner's on here. She's also a board member, and she's been doing shows a long time. So we got a wealth of knowledge here. All right. So Wanda,
Absolutely.
if you'd like
I'm
to
intimidated. I think a
introduce
lot of you
yourself
have
and
more
kick things
experience
off,
than
that'd be
me.
great.
Well, welcome everyone. I think this is a topic that anyone, whether seasoned or brand new, can always learn some tips on how to make what's a very difficult thing, preparing for an art fair, become easy. You know, it's hard enough to take pictures of your booth and take pictures of your beautiful artwork and get accepted into a show, but then you have to say, what now? How do I actually get it all organized? How do I get it all together and take it there? And how do I make it efficient? And and then you got art shows where there's something different, some twist, and how do you accommodate whatever the twist is, either the size of the booth or grass versus cement, or all those different things to think about when it comes to it. And we're open today to answer all of those questions. I thought I might start with something as simple as what I did when I was first starting out to try to help me be organized, just to start this conversation going. So I'm going to attempt to share a screen. We'll see if I am successful at that. Just need to share the right screen. I think this one will do it. Let me know if you are seeing something that says checklist for art fair.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So one of the things that I've done, this has been modified for a long time. It may or may not apply to you in exact detail, and I'm happy to share it, the actual document, if anybody wants it, though I think the key is more the concept. What I tried to do is to make sure that as I went through it, either the problems I had, to make sure I stopped having those problems at future shows, or for me, I don't keep everything in the same place. So when I'm getting ready for a show, where are all the things I need to get together? So that's kind of how I organized my checklist. So first, up right at the front, make sure I charge all the things that need to be charged before I leave the home. The point of sale system, whatever that happens to be, whatever your hardware device is, your phone, your lights, whatever other things. Obviously I ran into some problem there. So making sure I do that the night before I leave. For me, I have a lot of my work and supplies in bins, but I have some things that I don't keep in bins because I use them for other things. So number 2 for me was what's not in my bins that I need to gather. And for me, that was the straps for my weight, because my husband uses them for something else when I'm not using them. Screwdriver, power cords. For me, museum putty is something I use elsewhere for galleries and what have you, so I don't have an extra supply in my bins. I have 2 lights. Ignore the fact that I said theater room, because it's really not a theater room, but that's where I have my photo booth. So, I have to go get those lights because I'm using them also for my photo booth. And then yeah, wire ties. So just to give you an example, I have things that just don't make it in, or in the case of wire ties, I cut them when I get done and then I don't have enough for the next show. So I have to always make sure I add more. I put that there. Now, at our storage facilities where I keep most of our tent stuff. So, you know, I just made a list of all the things that are sitting in bins that are at the storage area. That's, for me, that's my shelves, my walls, my weights, my, you know, tent itself. And so so when I go to pick all that up and bring it back from the storage area, I know what I have to get out of the storage area. And then at home, the things that obviously we use every day, but I need there, things like the dolly, the ladder. At one point I was using a table. I actually don't use a table anymore, but you know, whatever things there that were in a place different than what needs to be. And finally I made a copy of the fire certificate and just keep it in my bins, but I obviously haven't updated my document. And then I kept like all the tools and supplies. So it's not art, but I need it to set up or take down or handle problems. And I'm going to bring up a few of these because if you're new, these might be important to you. I never leave home without duct tape and blue tape. There's always a need for something like that because of a repair or whatever. Ropes or bungees or whatever might be needed, depending on what kind of artwork you had. I always take extra extension cords. Now, I'm going to say something that I think all of us know. You also want to, over time, get rid of things you don't use that you never need because you take less is more. You want to take what you need, but what you don't need, you get rid of. But you want to have enough extension cords, depending on where power might be. It's not always right by your tent if electricity is a part of it. So just kind of there because, you know, like extra light bulbs, making sure I have bulbs because I keep them separate from the lights in my setup. You know, I don't think I keep the oversized garbage bags. When I was first doing it, that seemed like an important thing for rain or whatever, but I found I didn't need them. So I think I may keep one in there just as a backup. But that's the kind of thing you have to think about over time. Am I never using it? Have I hit every weather situation? Lighten the load. But don't lighten it too much. Yeah, so you have to know when you need it. So for me, also things that I don't keep, you know, in my, you know, art bin that I just grab, you know, step stools level because I have shelves and I need to make sure they're level before I put my glass art on them. By the way, phone has a level on it now, so I just don't, you know, so some of these things, you know, and if you don't know, it's the Measure app, and you can go in and set your phone on a shelf, and it'll tell you if things are level. You know, I need a hammer. Rags are always important because of dust, dirt, rain, whatever, to wipe down your things. And I call it the office bin, but I have a small bin it's actually where I keep my point of sale and my cash when I'm traveling. But there's certain things in there that I want to make sure have stayed in there. And then, you know, signage, whatever your signage is for, you know, prices for titles, whatever. You might have new art. So I keep that, you know, I made sure that I had, you know, just the trigger. Have you got all your price tags? Have you got all your wall signs, you know, banners and what have you? And to give you a bit of background, I move myself between indoor shows, outdoor shows, galleries, pop-ups. So some of this I had to do because I moved my stuff around depending on the show. And I never like to take more than I need for whatever I'm doing. And then I created a sales related set of lists, you know, do I have my cash? Do I have my point of sale? Business cards. I finally got rid of the receipt book. I was never using it. So I keep just some paper if somebody really, you know, where I take notes, but somebody really felt a need for paper, but I haven't in years had a need for paper. So you can, again, I'm not necessarily good about taking it down. I just kind of go, yeah, I'm not taking that. And to me, this list was really important when I first started out or after it's been a while since I've done a show. You know, once you get going, as you all know, you're probably keeping everything in place for the quote season. You know, I have some things in my so I have a pro panel desk, and I keep some things I keep the pro panel desk in the box it came in, and it's got some extra capacity. So I have some things I keep in there. And then your artwork. And I actually have another checklist I won't bore you with, but I get more specific about, but when I hit show season, I get real specific about what art I'm going to take. You know, definite, what's optional, as things sell. The one thing that I learned, that I'm sure all the rest of you have learned, less is more, especially less is more on the setup, maybe have some backup work. But again, for me, I have a variety. I have both wall art and sculptures and functional work. And so this is just a kind of a basic thing to say, have I done it? But then I actually create a list for the season, whatever my new works are. And that way I also know what my price, I have my price labels, and I'm sure all of you have thoughts on that. And then for me, at the beginning of the season, I'm gathering them and putting them into bins if they're not in bins, or I'm rearranging them in bins so that I can set up better. For me, if I can put my wall art in bins separate from the sculptures, etc., then I can set up the wall first, and then the shelves and the sculptures. So I try to organize my art for this to make setup easy, and also label the bins I put them in, so that takedown, I know I've got and I keep the bubble wrap in those bins. When I sell something, I use new bubble wrap, so that way when I go to take down, the bubble wrap in the bin that's marked for that stuff is going to fit all the work that needs to go back in the bin. So I'm not fighting that aspect when I take down, when all you want to do is be done. And then don't forget these are the things that I think we sometimes forget: sunglasses, snacks, first aid kit, Tylenol, the things that are going to make you okay. Rain jacket, sweater, if it's depending on the season. If you think you might need to change your clothes after you set up, to have that, whatever, those kinds of things. Do I take those at every show? No, but I at least can kind of say, do I have them? Because again, I don't keep those all in one place. So the other thing I thought I'd share with you is when I first started, do you see light dome setup steps? When I first started, I found Light Dome has I have a Light Dome. Light Dome has great videos, also has some instructions, but I found that if I went through and said, this is what I'm going to do first, this is what I'm going to do second, this is what I'm going to do third, do I need that after I've done 3 or 4 shows in a row? No. But when I do that first show of the year, or I've had a big long lag, this first thing of knowing the order that works for me, and it'll be different for everybody. But, this just was, step 1, do the 4 corner poles. I'm not going to read them all to you. When I put the mesh walls up, when I put the vinyl saws up, when, what do I need to do to tighten everything down? When, so I don't do them out of order, because when I've done them out of order by not looking at my list, I end up having to take it down and start over, because I've done it out of sequence. If I put my awning up too soon, then I end up taking the awning poles down because I need to put up my mesh walls or whatever. And what's the right time to telescope up, and that for me, if you know how to set your tent up and you have a tent that's really easy, you don't need this. And do I need it after I've done 2 or 3 shows? No, but I have it, and I actually have it in those plastic see-through sleeves printed out, so I take it to the show. But I use iPhone's Notes app, and so what you're seeing here is this is in there. So I also have it on my phone. And then, this is what I should make sure I do before I leave at the end of the day, take down whatever I'm going to do, just some little reminders before I walk away from the tent at the end of the show. And then, takedowns just reverse, because I've set it up. If I just go in the reverse order of how I set it up, it'll come down relatively well, and kind of just reminding me where things go, because I guess I'm old and I tend to sometimes forget which bag is what thing. And then I have the whole shelving system. So this is just a quick note of reminder for me of my shelving system. And I'm not going to bore you, but I have another checklist that is about, sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once. That's about like the indoor shows, and what, if any of you've done Queenie, it's 10 by 8. So I have some notes of what I do to adjust for specific shows that are unique. So it's probably this list, but with modifications or whatever. indoor shows, I'm not setting the tent up, but for me, I set my tent wall frame up and use my mesh walls at indoor shows. So I just have this list easily, because when you get to a show, you don't want to have to start thinking, you want to start doing, at least I do. Are there any questions? Well, I try to figure out how not to share anymore.
I have some things to expand a little bit on what you said, Wanda. For one, like you mentioned, carrying duct tape with you, which I think is an excellent idea. And what I started doing is carrying white duct tape, because if I get a rip in my tent, I want to repair it with the white duct tape. It doesn't stand out as easily. And like how you've got your things in bins and all that kind of stuff, I do the same thing with my smaller photos and 8x10s and stuff like that. I put them in Rubbermaid tubs and everything. But I've also found that, because I have cats, I get the plastic cat litter tubs. Those make excellent storage containers for like your electric cords, your extra light bulbs, things like that. And they're stackable. So and I label everything like you did. I label on the top what's found in that particular container. And I'm able to stack them. They don't take up a lot of space and stuff in the vehicle. So, and the other thing, you mentioned a fire certificate. I've done one show that required that you have a fire extinguisher. So I would carry that around with me and have it in my booth. I never had anyone check for it, but I've not heard of a fire certificate. So what is that? Could you tell me?
I'd have to go find it. I think it comes with your tent. I think it's something that it's just been so long. It might be something that, if there's a pause, I'll walk into the other room and see if I can find it. But I think it's got something to do with your tent. Don't hold me to that.
Okay. I do know that I had a show, I think it was down in Springfield, where they wanted, because on like sewing inside the tent roof, I think is a thing that says something about the fire retardants or whatever of that tent. And so maybe that's what you're talking about, because I know that one show said that they would be going around and checking that, because maybe if you just buy a cheap pop-up at Walmart or something, it might not meet the standards of. Okay.
I think Light Dome came with a certificate around that. So I think it is something. I think you're right about that.
Some of the table coverings, tablecloths and things, they like for them to be fire retardant also. And they usually have a tag somewhere on the tablecloth that says that they are.
Any other suggestions or questions?
I'll just say, I love how organized you are.
Yeah.
It's a necessity for me.
I have a question. You said you used to take receipt books and you don't do that anymore. Do people not ask you for a receipt?
No, the honest truth is any of the point of sale systems, whether it's Square or I use Shopify, you can either do an email receipt or a text receipt, and people are quite sufficiently happy with that. So if you enter in your sale into Square, but the next thing up after you've done the sale is, do you want a receipt? And so I always just ask the customer, do you want an email or a text receipt? And for years now, no one has asked for a paper receipt.
So do they?
So I think what I actually did is,
do they have to give you their phone number and everything for that to happen?
Yeah, they can type it in. I just hand them the phone. They key it in, and it's not something I have later. But I've never had anybody say it. I can't remember the last time, and maybe some of you who've been doing it a while can say if you've had anybody, but I haven't. But like I said, I keep a little notebook in, and I can handwrite a receipt. And I actually do keep like 1 or 2 little receipt things from my receipt book in the thing. And that's just me trying to keep down to a minimum what I have to take that I'm not using. But most everybody is sufficiently, and if you're using Square of all things, people, once they do Square once and they've given anyone who uses Square their email or their text, it actually, and it, with that credit card, it then pops up, and all they have to do is say yes, they want it. They're not even
Oh.
giving it to you anymore.
Hmm.
You're only seeing the last couple of digits of the phone number or the email. Carol, did you say you had someone ask for receipt?
No, actually, I usually say, I use Square, and she just covered the same thing about the Square. And honestly, if somebody, you can enter cash transactions into your Square, and then you can send a receipt through there. It's all manually done, but you can actually send receipts if you have a cash sale. But most credit cards connected through the system worldwide the Square will identify and recognize them and automatically pull up either their email or their phone number. And you can opt to say, would you like a receipt? And then would you like a receipt? Yes, no receipt. And then you give the options to your Square. But most people with a cash and carry, simple sales, they don't require a receipt. They're just happy to be there.
Well, that's
Yeah,
interesting,
and,
because it takes
you know,
so
I-
long to fill that out for everybody you sell something to. I'm filling out a receipt for everybody, and it gets kind of hairy.
Yeah, it's just not neat. And most everybody's used to that now. And I use Shopify now. I use Square as my backup just because I used Square before I switched to my Shopify website. But I use it looks just like the Square. It's just a little device. But for me, and you might want to look at your website provider. All my inventory is on my website. My inventory is on my point of sale. When I make a sale, it takes it off my website. And the same thing, and it works the exact same way as Square. It'll come up, and if they've ever used Shop Pay for any shop that's using Shopify, it'll come up with their email or their text automatically. And it'll, in the case of that, and I think Square does this too, but it'll also ask them if they want to join the mailing list. So that's a separate question. Them giving it for a receipt is not automatically signing them up for any mail list. If someone asks that, I will make sure I tell them that I have no access when it comes to receipt to their information.
Hey, Pat.
Yeah,
Pat, I'm curious, how have you been taking credit cards
I use the
for
Square.
Pat? How have you been?
I use
Okay.
Square.
Yeah, it should be, like Wanda said, it should automatically come up with the thing, do you want a receipt? So I'm surprised because, I would ditch the handwritten, because that is so time consuming.
Yeah,
So
it
time
is.
consuming. Like Carol said, if you have a cash sale, if you have a cash sale and you want to, they want a receipt, you could enter it in and be able to send them a receipt too. So I think that's something that will help you out a lot this year.
Yeah.
Moving to utilizing Square, fully,
Carol
Yeah.
brought up something in chat that I'm just going to point out. She mentioned using plastic containers, not boxes. And I have a lot of plastic. When I say bins, mine are all plastic for the reasons that Carol brought up about dew and wetness and all that. So good recommendation, Carol. I also happened to run across this post in Art Fair Reviews on Facebook that just came out, I think, yesterday, where someone asked, how do you guys organize for art fairs? And there was a lot of interesting tips in there. One of them is I found loading my show boxes and vehicle the same way every time really helps me identify things that might go missing. My truck gets loaded in a specific order each time, both at the show tear down and when preparing for a show. This approach did really mess me up when I swapped indoor shows and no longer needed a canopy. That was a little more information I needed, but that's a good point. If you can figure it out, I have this tendency there. Maybe my lack of organization shows up. I take a picture as a couple of pictures as I'm loading to remind me how I loaded it. for this particular show. So hopefully I can reduce the time it takes to get it all back in, because I don't have a luxury of a big van like a lot of people do. So it's a joy to make sure it all gets back into the back of my SUV. Let's see what else did I see. Besides checking and restocking booth supplies, I always check the weather forecast and carry the appropriate weather gear. And somebody reminded people of weights depending on the wind. A lot of people talked about keeping lists. Some people talked about leaving their vehicles packed up during their heavy high season. If you can do that, that's great. I don't have that luxury.
What I did because I have to borrow my friend Deb's van when I was doing art shows and stuff. And so what I would do is I would leave like the booth and all my electrical stuff, all that, my pro panels, I'd leave that in the van because it didn't have to be used between shows, but I would bring the artwork back in the house because I didn't want it subjected to the weather and stuff. But it really cut down on my load time and stuff with just having to load the art each time, so something like that. And plus too, when I first got a van, my friend Jay Phillips, he's a woodworker in Best Missouri Hands. He built me a shelf that just like 2.5 foot wide, probably about maybe 2 foot tall, just enough to slide my tent under there in that, because your tent and your weights are going to be the first thing you need at an outdoor art show, and they're going to be the last things you put in. So like Wanda said, she doesn't really have that luxury, but if you have a vehicle big enough that you can, kind of dedicate to the art shows and stuff, it's nice to have a shelf unit built in there so that you can pile artwork or whatever else on top. But that tent you can grab right away and you can shove it in last with not having to move a bunch of stuff in the weights and stuff. So that's helpful if you've got the space that you can do that.
My question is, and it's on this topic, is how big of a vehicle do you need to carry all this stuff? I mean, I've seen people who have little trailers that they pull, or they get these huge vans, but for just regular everyday people who don't have that, I mean, what kind of vehicle are you using and how do you get it in there?
Well, I'll tell you, I had to be creative because we made a conscious decision we were not going to invest in a separate vehicle for art shows. So we have an older 2003 4Runner, and we just put the seats down, and I have to work very hard. That's probably one of the reasons for the list, to keep my bins down, because in my case, I have a lot of bins with the glass because you can't have big bins because everything will break. So I have to figure out how much art I can fit, how many other bins I have. And for some shows, if I know I can get some help, I'll put the tent up on the roof. Otherwise, I put it in the vehicle. Because if I'm doing it all by myself, I can't do it all. I can't put it back up on the roof once it's at the end of the show. So the tent, in order for it to fit, any of those long things, they're going on top. They're going up the top of the passenger seat, to get the length in. It's a creative process and it's doable, but I think you got to practice that. You got to put everything out and see how it all fits in there and make adjustments, based on that. But the biggest challenge I would think would be the tent, just the length of the poles. Even though they come down, even though you retract them, they're still, a little longer than 6 feet, I think is why I have to put some things over the passenger seat, because the bed of our 4Runner is a little less than 6 feet. It's a creative thing, but once you figure it out, then you just document how you do it. And if you can do like Kim said, and you can, I found for the most part, I can put a lot of the bins and then put some of the display stuff on top of the bins, or the bins on one side and the shelving and the tent and everything on one side, so that you can do what Kim said, is get out what you need first, put back in at the last If you can do those, a lot of shows make you get everything packed up before you can put anything away or, take your vehicle away anyway. So that to me that shouldn't be a deterrent if you have to pack a different way, because a lot of shows, they want your vehicle away from the booth very quickly. So they want you to unload everything and get it out of the way. Anybody else have some ideas?
I have,
One thing too on that, when you have to unload. Oh,
no, go ahead.
what, like I had a show where you had to unload everything right away and they gave you like 20 minutes. And I mean, it was ridiculous. So I would recommend that you bring some tarps and some clamps, because it was raining when I had to unload everything. And so I stacked everything. I tarped it really nice and clamped it so I could move the vehicle and everything. So it's always nice to have some tarps on hand, and I usually buy white tarps because they blend in with your tent when you're set up and everything, and it just makes things look nicer, because if you're storing stuff behind your booth during an art show, you can stack things up and tarp it and stuff. And then I also feel like too, then things that are behind my tent aren't going to walk off easily, because it'll be a pain to get to them and stuff for somebody else. Sorry, Carol.
No, it's fine. I actually, I started in this art show doing large canvases as a photographer, and my favorite is a 20 by 30. So that meant that I could not use this as a vehicle, because I have to use the shipping boxes in order to travel with everything, because you can't stack the big canvases. They're all framed and whatnot. So I actually have a 14-foot trailer. But when I was vehicle shopping, one thing about vehicle shopping I did was I had a full-size SUV that I could put anything and everything in, and decided to downsize the vehicle. But the one thing I did when I vehicle shopped was make sure all three sets of, I have a 3-row seat SUV now, and I made sure all three sets of the back seats all went down flat, because now lots of cars, the passengers row, the seats will only go down like this, and that means you lose all of that packing space. So that's one thing I did. And I also required, I went in with a measuring tape, and I'm sure the guys at the dealerships thought I was insane. And because I wanted to go back and measure from the back line of the front passenger seat and driver's seat back to the hatch. And I needed to know what the distance was all the way back, and make sure that I knew what the width was, and if there were wheel wells that were going to impede as well. Some vehicles have wheel wells inside, some do not. So those are all little things I did in choosing this last go around with a vehicle. I also got a tow package so I could pull my trailer, and I got a roof racks. The roof racks are really great, because then you could just put all that stuff on at last minute, depending on what your setup's going to be. And I'm trying to downsize and do smaller things now at this point in life, so I'm not pulling my trailer nearly as much as I was.
Something else that maybe you might want to consider too, like when I was shopping for a vehicle, I noticed that in general, the minivans were actually larger than most SUVs. And the minivans tend to have it where they fold down flat, where you don't have the wheel wells, and they do fold down. For me, even a minivan wasn't really, like a standard minivan wasn't an option, because I have full size pro panels, and I knew right away that I wanted my pro panels to sit vertically in my van. And I did not find a single minivan or SUV on the market that would allow that to happen, except for my Ford Transit. And I do have the minivan version of a Ford Transit. So it's not a full size van. It is sort of the minivan version. And, at the time, if I had just bit the bullet and got the bigger one, I probably would have been better off long term, because I kind of regret that. But because my van is taller than the average minivan, it works out really well. But my van is actually slightly shorter than some of the larger ones. I mean, my brother can fit an 8x4 sheet of drywall in his minivan. I can get about 6.5 feet in mine. So it's long enough to fit my pro panels, and that's really the only thing I needed to worry about. But I am taking a lot of canvases, but I mean, Kim can probably tell you, like, I know how my van's going to be packed. There's a space for everything and everything in its space. And it goes in and out like clockwork because I know exactly how it's going to be packed every time, in and out. I've built in the shelves and everything. So, and when it's off season, I just take my shelves out and I put my seats back in. But another thing to keep in mind is, like Kim was saying, there are a lot of shows that you only have a short amount of time to drop off. There are also a lot of shows where trailers and larger like box trucks are impossible to get through. You know, I've done shows where the space between the tents that you're supposed to be able to use to get through is barely big enough for a large van, let alone if you have a trailer, and God forbid you have to back out of something. I had a trailer my first year and it was miserable. So kind of keep that in mind. A trailer is so functional, but if you know that you want to get in and out quickly, I would recommend getting a bigger vehicle than trying a trailer because some of those places can get pretty hairy.
Yeah, I was lucky early on
I
that
highly recommend.
some experienced. Go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to say, I highly recommend that anybody, if you're at a show that Molly is doing, especially an outdoor show, go over and check out her vehicle and how she does things and stuff, because I guarantee you, if there was a Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest breakdown and get your ass out of the show, Molly would win hands down. I mean, they'll be like, okay, show's closed. And I'll look over 5 minutes later and Molly's pulling away. She's gone. So, when I grow up, I want to be like Molly on packing up after a show and getting home. So
I'm notoriously the last one out. So everybody knows me. I repeat shows. Last 3 shows, I've not been the last one out, but they have agreed I'm usually the last one out. And also I would say I have roll-up mesh walls instead of the pro panels. So I have the luxury of other choices as opposed to just the panels that don't fall.
I too have that. I felt the roll-up mesh walls. I had the luxury of a couple of experienced artists tell me early on, don't get a trailer, because that, again, we didn't want to buy a dedicated vehicle for art shows, and they gave me all the pros and cons that Molly listed out about, not that you shouldn't do it, but just know how much more of a hassle some shows can be with a trailer. And finding parking, even if it's okay for getting set up, finding parking sometimes for trailers or other vehicles that are not standard may not be easy at some of the shows. So probably also knowing what shows you are targeting to be a part of and what their setup is can also be a good decision point for you if you kind of know some of that. If you got to find parking on city streets or in garages or whatever, you're going to have more of a challenge with certain vehicles than others. And I'm sure there are a set of shows that most everybody wants to be in. Or if you're thinking about applying, you might look at their setup, knowing your setup, just so you know what hassles and whether or not those hassles are worthwhile. I mean, I did a couple shows early on that I would never do again because they were too much of a hassle for me. And I learned that the hard way. And sometimes that's the only way you can find. I will also suggest that if you're thinking about a new show and you can't find any reviews out on Art Fair Reviews and Facebook, post to Best of Missouri Hands members only. Has anybody ever done the show? Can you tell me about whatever it is you're wanting to know about the show? Because we have a lot of generous artists in our group that if they've done it, they'll be happy to give you any information they can. And it's always invaluable when you're, if nothing else, preparing for the show. Sometimes shows have rules that they put in their legal documents that might turn you off. And then you find out, they really aren't paying attention to those, and you really could have applied or you could have been in that show. And so sometimes it's good to get some experience kind of from that perspective too. What other questions does anybody have? Nancy?
I just want to say something. I don't do outside shows. It's too difficult for me to do by myself. I do inside shows, and then I travel to teach. And I use boxes. Some of them are clear, some of them are legal boxes. It depends on what shape I'm in at the time. But I number my boxes so I know how many go in and how many come out and go back in. And I put a list inside the lid. So I know box 1 has point of sale, box 2 has tools, whatever, but it's not where people, if they were looking in my vehicle, could see what the list is for the box. Because I travel with jewelry, I travel with wire supplies, so I don't want people to see what's actually in my vehicle.
Other questions?
You're muted. You're muted,
Laura,
Laura.
you're muted.
Thank you. How do you, or my question was pro panels. Are they solid like walls?
I'll
Yeah,
answer that.
and Molly, okay, like Molly said, she has the ones that are one piece. Pro panels come in like one piece where they're 6 foot or 7 foot tall, or they have the break apart where they break apart in the middle. So it makes it, it doesn't take up the length. It still takes up a lot of space because now you got 2 pieces for every wall section. But if you're interested in get them, because they do really make a booth look a lot nicer. I started out with chicken wire as my first booth, and eventually, gradually, as I was able to, I improved my booth slowly over the years. And so the pro panels do give a more professional look, but you don't have to go out and buy them brand new. If you do for a booth, a 10 by 10 booth, you're talking, over $1,000, maybe $2,000 for your walls. People are selling them all the time. People are upgrading, people are retiring, whatever. I got my walls for the full booth for $300 from an artist that was retiring. So, don't feel like you got to go out and spend all this money for everything. Everything in my booth, I bought used from somebody else, except for my desk and my print bins. But I used award money. Whenever I win an award, I put that money back into the booth. And so I was able to purchase my print bins and desks that way, but the pro panels are light, even like Molly's are one single piece. They're a little harder to handle because if a wind catches you while you're trying to set it up, that's harder, but they're light. They're something that you can easily pick up and, attach to each other and stuff. And they come in different colors. You can get gray, brown, green,
Do you know what
So
the pro
do you
panels
all
are? I think maybe if we explain what they are, it might be what your answer is. But like pro panels, if you've ever seen an art fair, it looks like a cubicle wall. They're covered in like carpeting. And so they have metal supports, like poles that actually are interior, and they're supported with foam inside, and they're covered in carpeting. So they allow you to use like like just clips for your curtains to be able to just hang your artwork, or you can also use shelving or whatever. But they are very versatile, and they do come in different sizes too. So like they have the 6 foot and like 7 foot, but they also come in increments. Like mine are like about 3.5 foot wide, and they also have different ones. So that like mine, 3 of them fit exactly in a 10 by 10 booth. Whereas I think Kim has some that are like a little, you know, narrower or whatever, but they are really functional because they're lightweight, much more so than some of the metal rigs that people will have from like department stores or like some of those kinds of places where you can get walls that are like mesh walls or like the actual metal grid walls. I mean, but yeah, they're the ones you always see with carpet though, and you can make them too.
Thank you.
If you've got the space
Mhm.
to transport them, I absolutely recommend pro panels. You know, just they look wonderful in your booth. And you can't, for those of you who may be doing things that don't hang on the wall, and or maybe you're doing pottery or me like glass art, if you've got, again, if you've got the space to store them and move them between shows, I would go there. But you can also get shelves, a shelving system for the pro panels as well that hook onto the carpeted walls, in addition to the hanging system. So that's an option. You don't consider yourself out of the running for that. And if you're like me and I just don't have the space, I bought the mesh walls that go with my light dome tent. And the mesh walls securely go from the top pole and then the stabilizer pole on the bottom and are taut. And I can hang my art. And if you guys know anything about glass art that's hanging on the wall with the stainless steel behind it, it's a little heavier than a traditional painting, and it does just fine. Now, I'm not doing a whole wall of that, though I have done that before. I have had a wall, one wall with all wall art, and then my sculptures on the other side and shelves. So it's an option, my view, of mesh walls, and you can get mesh walls in a variety of colors depending on, you know, what you think looks good with your art. So my 2 cents, if you got the space to store and carry and do the pro panels, you'll have the most professional look. Next, in my opinion, I think the mesh walls look a lot better than the grid walls, because it truly is a wall. And when you have your tent walls down, it looks real solid. But when you raise your walls up, it's not as open as grid walls. It's a tight mesh, but you'll get some sun through depending on what you're doing with those. So, and you can look at those setups online. You can, yeah, if you want, you go out to my website and see my setup under art fairs. I don't think my more professional one has made it there. I'm a little slow on updating that part of my website, but, or you can just go out and go to any of the tent manufacturers. They'll have examples and pictures of setups with their tents and with their mesh walls, or go out to the pro panel site. Or I just did a Google on pro panels and went to images, and you can see tons of images of art set up in pro panels.
Two more things I might
Uh,
mention too. If you're
one-
doing the outdoor shows, those mesh walls do breathe a lot easier. So if you're having just 3 solid walls of pro panels, it, you know, sometimes, especially the darker colors, can get really hot. The other thing I'll mention is pro panels are obviously the brand that most people use, but Armstrong also has their own set, and I don't think they're any cheaper. But I prefer the Armstrong print bends, for example. They have different shapes that I prefer because I can get 2 levels instead of just 1. But so if you're ever looking for something, or for accessories for your pro panels, Armstrong also has some really cool accessories and light kits and all kinds of stuff too.
Thank you. So can you all set up your tent by yourself? You do
When I
this
was
all by
looking to buy
yourself?
it, yeah, when I was looking to buy a tent, I talked to a lot of artists about their different tents, particularly around, I needed one that was strong, and I couldn't go with an easy up. I have glass art, just not going to happen. So I wanted all that criteria, plus I wanted to be able to do it myself. Now, at the time, I decided light dome was the answer for me. I think they're all reasonably equal, Tremline, light dome, and the others, but I think you can go out and they're all going to show videos of how to set up the tent, so you can kind of see how it is. And I talked to several artists, including several Best of Missouri Hands artists, when I was looking at them. And this was several years ago. So again, if you're looking at them and you're trying to decide between them, find some artists that have both and get their views on the pros and cons of whatever having. You'll probably find some artists who have experience with multiple brands as well. I'm not saying anything negative about easy ups when I say that. It's just, for me, I didn't feel comfortable with that kind of a setup for my kind of art. Some shows won't let you have easy ups, So that then it comes down to what you have. Sometimes I wish I had an easy up for the shows that allow it and they're not, and the weather's, the weather's good because it would be faster. But if you're going to set up by yourself, the other thing I would recommend, take the time to set it up in your backyard a couple of times. Set it up, take it down, set it up, take it down. You know, first time when I bought mine, my husband came out and helped me the first time set it up just to figure it out. Then we took it all down, and then I did it a couple times by myself. There's always that fourth leg that's a challenge. So you have to figure out how you can do it by yourself. And granted, a lot of times in an art show, you can grab somebody to say, could you hold this for me? Because my biggest challenge for me when I'm doing it by myself is especially in the indoor, because you got to get an angle when you're doing it by yourself. And so sometimes it's easier to grab somebody to just say, can you hold this one while I raise up the, you know, to get that squaring first step in. But you'll learn all that by doing it a few times. Now, Molly, you have any views? Do you do it by yourself?
Yeah, I do mine myself. I'm with you completely on the easy up situation. I would not if I were you. I own a light dome and I have never used it. I have set it up a total of 2 times ever. I bought it right before the pandemic. But yeah, I'm an easy up girl. I travel so much and I do so many shows out of town and I'm in a hurry or there's something going on and I'm just impatient. So I do use an easy up because it's just so much easier and I'm short. So I don't know how you get to the top of that light dome. The 2 times I've set mine up, I'm like miserable trying to get that thing over my head. I don't know. But
well, I'm 5'3", Molly. I'm short too.
All right, well, we're the same height. So I don't
2 steps, yeah, I use a step ladder and I do it.
Yeah, so but I have the extra weight of my pro panels and the stuff that I have, and then I have my weights and everything. And the only time I've ever had a problem, honestly, is when literally the whole show went down. So there was nobody left standing at the end of that show anyway. So I've been really fortunate, knock on wood. But yeah, I have had to replace my Easy Up once. And I might end up replacing it this next season sometime. But yeah, I've tried a lot of them. And like you said, like I do have a light dome. I don't prefer it. It's just so much easier for me to get in and out. And when I know that I've done a Sunday show and I have a 6 to 8 hour drive going home and I go home. So it's just a long day if you have to, you know, and I do some 1-day shows where you're setting up, working, tearing down and driving home, you know, so I'm all
And
about
it might be
ease.
the you know, if you've got the financial and space capacity, it might be beneficial to have an easy up and a higher end tent. So for 1-day shows and all that, you got the easy up version. And when you have the days where you're overnight and you got winds to worry about and all those kinds of things, you can set up the, you know, other tent. I'm not trying to tell you to spend more money. I know several artists do have both kinds of tents.
Now,
Carol?
I don't have a cheap Easy Up. I'll tell you, mine is one of the top of the line ones. I really don't want to have to worry about liability with, I would hate for one of my neighbors that, you know, to mine to crash into theirs. So I am particular. I have a certain one that I like, and that I've had good luck with. And that, you know, they're advancing all the time. I mean, I've just heard recently that you can spend, you know, upwards of $1,000 to $1,500 just on an Easy Up, and you'll get one that has the aluminum with the, instead of being 4-sided like mine is, you'll get the octagon shape or the hexagon shaped, you know, supports. So they're making different kinds all the time. And I'm sure that's just going to get better and better, or you never know with our, they want to keep them, renew them, but I don't know.
Hey, Laura, what
Carol, you
area
wanted to
are
say
you
something?
in, Laura?
Pardon me?
What area are you in? Are
Central
you
Missouri.
Springfield?
No, Central Missouri, between
Missouri.
outside 30 miles from Sedalia, north.
Okay. What I would recommend, if you've not set up a tent, or if you don't have one, go to an art show where like where you're allowed to like set up the day before. So like Art in the Park in Columbia is a good example. There'll be artists setting up the day before. So they're a lot more relaxed. When you have to set up and show the same day, people get kind of, I got it, but Art in the Park would be an excellent place to go during setup and walk around and talk to the different artists, see the different tents, see how they're going up. Because I had a friend ask me, because I have a light domo, so I had a friend ask me to help her set up whatever the other brand is. And to me, it was like a foreign. I'm like, man, I don't know. This is so different. They had the hoops that go on the roof and, and so I really would, because I set my tent up by myself. Like Wanda said, I have a little step ladder because I'm shorter than her and Molly. I'm 5'2", so I have to have a step ladder. Otherwise, I couldn't do it. But and the same, like Wanda said, I think it was Wanda, ask a neighbor to help or something. At any art show, always get to know your neighbors and be kind to them, because you want them to be kind to you and stuff. Everybody is willing to pitch in. Almost everybody says it throws your tent cockeyed when you're setting legs up, and if someone's already set up alongside you got to be careful and all that. Grab a neighbor. They are more than happy to help you. But I would recommend you go to an art show and watch a couple tents going up.
Carol?
One thing I just want to add as because Barb was asking a little bit, because with the tent, when you go indoors, then the game changes, because sometimes your layout of space you're given may be only 5 foot by 8 foot or whatever. You made for pop-up shows, just have an indoor space. So, and some do not allow you to put your tent up or your tent frame. So, so you have to think outside the box. I use tall metal grids, and I use bungees, not bungees, but zip ties, and I'll make triangles with them so they're self-standing, and then put a bungee cord to the table so they're stable. And so sometimes you have to work with whatever the parameters of the layout is of the venue indoors. So indoors changes up completely than outdoors.
And that's
And Pat,
another advantage to having pro panels. Having the pro panels over the mesh walls. The mesh walls are much cooler in the summer and an outdoor show than the pro panels. They hold in the heat and stuff. But at an indoor show, like Molly said, pro panels have a lot of flexibility as to the different shapes and getting down to smaller sizes and stuff like that. So that's another thing. Go to an art show and walk around and see, do people have the grid walls, the mesh walls, the pro panels and stuff. You gotta really kind of just play with it. And you might end up with something and you're like, this doesn't really work for me. But get in there and talk to other artists and see what they're doing. And are they happy with their setup? Would they change something? Because there's a million different combinations. There's no one right way. You got to do what fits and works for you.
I was actually in one show that the organization, she doesn't do this show anymore, but she did not want you to block your neighbor with solid walls. They wanted it open so that as people go, that they could see from vendor to vendor to vendor, which was kind of unusual. So that's why sometimes you have to read the fine print for the requirements of who is running the show.
I was looking at the Facebook review. If you are on Facebook and are not following Art Fair reviews, I would suggest it, because it's just a good place, or just go browse it once in a while. But this particular post was 6 days ago when somebody asked how do you. But another thing that a couple of people have mentioned that I didn't mention as far as things on my checklist is things that they also put on their checklist if they're traveling versus when they're home, as far as things they need personally when they're staying at a hotel or if they're camping. And some people have checklists for what they need to do for their home before they leave their home. So they're much more detailed than I am. Things like turning off the lights feeding the animals, whatever. And a lot of people emphasize
one thing I do,
practicing your.
sorry. I was just gonna say, one thing I do at every art show, I keep a little book with me and I map out how I set up my tent each time because it might be a different layout depending on where I'm set up and everything. So I will draw a map and I'll label it what show it was so that, you know, the next year, if I'm in that show, I can easily remember what setup worked for me at that show. And another thing too, at every show, I will take a booth shot. And so I would recommend doing that. If you got time when you've set up, do it before you put your signage up, do it before you put your chair in your booth, or do it at the end of the show, take out the chair, take out the signage and stuff. But I take a booth shot at every show because then if I apply for that show the next year, I can send a booth shot in that is representative of how my booth looked the last year at that show. And with Wanda saying like with the mesh walls, because they are great if you're doing an outdoor show in a tent, but make sure you put down your outer walls before you take that booth shot, because you don't want to take that booth shot and be able to have the judges be able to see through your walls to the people behind you and stuff like that. So before you take that booth shot, put those walls down, make sure everything's nice and clean and stuff. And, but yeah, I would make a habit
if you
of just
could-
taking a booth shot at each show.
I don't know if you can see this, but this is how detailed I am. This is what I do at the beginning of the season for every layout that I'm going to have 10 by 10 or whatever, because I have shelves and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this says what's going to be on the wall. This says what's going to be on each shelf, where I'm going to put my pedestal, some of that. So again, if I think that through at the beginning of the season, I can get pretty repetitive about my setup and takedown and all that. So this is just an Excel. I mean, you can do it on paper. I did it originally on grid wall paper, and then I just did this because I couldn't go in and change out the art when it sells or, you know, whatever. And I could just, and I, you know, I have it for each different layout, and I have a whole folder full of them. I don't get rid of them like Kim. I can go back and refer to them, and I have them online so I can just modify them. You might not want to be like that, but for me, if I've thought it through once at the beginning of the season, how I want to lay out based on my experience in the past, and because I use iPhone notes, whatever you use, it's on my phone. If I'm at the show and I've either forgotten something or I do something different or I want to do something different for the next show, I just create myself a little list of things that I'm going to either bring back tomorrow, or those I use to send myself an email. But if I'm going to modify my setup or do any kind of change, I make that as a note for myself. So because I don't know, I would forget. Other thoughts or questions?
One thing
Martha?
I do is I, like Kim or whoever said they keep a little book. I keep a little book and I say what the tax rate was at that particular show. I say what my total was. And I also put down what the weather was, when the weekend was, what the conditions were. Was it windy? Was it sunny? Was it raining? Was it cold? Sorry. And so that's one thing that really helps me. So I can go, okay, my sales were a little down because it was windy or there was an ice storm, you know, because you forget those things from year to year.
I second that. I
that's
keep
good.
a little booklet, like probably similar to what you have. And I just write down notes of the show. Like she said, like you're including things about whatever's going on at the show. Like if I had a show last year, my booth space literally had a car parked in it. And so they had to like move me from one spot to another. I'm not likely to forget that next year or for this year, but you know, 2 years from now, I might want to remember that. And I'll just write down fun little anecdotes or whatever. If I see a really cool t-shirt, if I talk to a client, like sometimes I'll also make notes about specific customers that I feel were important to the day, or that I think may come back. So like if I get an order or somebody calls in and says, hey, I saw you at a show, I might actually be able to go back to my book and say, hey, I wrote down some notes about that person. And then it also kind of gives me an idea of like some of the bigger sales that I made. I'll be able to go back to my booklet and say, oh yeah, this one I did have like two big particular sale, like customers that made an impression on me. Maybe I should think about something that might cater to them for next year. You never know. Like whatever kind of notes I think might be relevant for future me, because I know that current me has a terrible memory and I use lists and I do a diagram and everything like Wanda does. So whatever you can do to help yourself for next year and thinking about like, because you're going to come to a choice. Like right now, everyone's thinking, what did I do last year? Do I want to do that show again? And the rule of thumb I always heard was do your shows at least 2 or 3 times to give them a real chance. But let's face it, there are some shows that I've one and done for me. Like there's some shows that I feel burnt bridges in a way that I will never go back. But again, then there's some where, you're like, well, maybe this was just a fluke. So, but I make notes on that kind of stuff too, and it's always fun to go back because I always wrote something silly or dumb, or, I got some guy talk to me for like, 45 minutes about Sherlock Holmes or whatever. I don't know, but it's funny and it kind of makes it entertaining to go back to. Anyway.
So I want to know about prices. Do you sell like more lower priced items, or do you have a variety of price ranges, price points?
I'll jump in on that one. I think Laura, it depends on the show. And that's another good reason to kind of research the shows. But most of my shows I have from, $5.50 cards up to, $750 canvas. But my note cards are normally what makes a show for me. But the nicer my booth has gotten and stuff, I've noticed that my higher end stuff sells better. But when I got into the St. Louis Art Fair, I couldn't show my note cards there because they're not limited edition works. And I was scared to death because I'd never done a show without my note cards. And I've done I did art in the park one year. I did over $1,000 in note cards. But you know how many sales that took? I mean, I'd rather sell one big piece and make that money than, to have 100 small sales. But the St. Louis Art Fair, I was scared to death, not having my cards. I'm like, I'm going to go home. It's going to be bust. I will tell you what, I had a couple walk in my booth before the show even opened. I was still hanging and straightening stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, this is really nice and everything, and I'm like, well, let me know if you need help. And so then they're like, oh, well, we think we're ready. And I'm like, oh, you want to get something? And they're like, yeah, we'll take that one and that one and that one and that one. They bought 5 pieces, 5 large pieces. So it depends on your show. So I mean, you got to kind of get to research your shows either by attending them. I used to volunteer at a show before I applied for it. Now I'm just going to go by other artists and stuff like that. But talk to those artists. They're there to help you out and stuff, But normally for most shows, I would say have a range because there's going to be people that are never going to buy that big piece no matter what. And then there's other people that are just going to be, I'm going home with that. I don't care. What the cost is, I'm going home with that. So that's my thoughts. Have a variety, but know your show. Know your show.
I think you need to definitely have a variety. Like in my show, I sell my gourds. And of course, I like to sell my big pieces. That's my goal. But to draw them into my booth, I sell ornaments that are made from gourds. So I have those ornaments on the end of my table to draw people to me because that's something that catches their eye. And then once I get them in there because of the ornaments, then they look around at everything else and will, often I'll make a sale that way. So you need something smaller or whatever, just draw them into your booth and make them feel like they can afford to be there. And then let them, then they'll peruse your booth and perhaps buy something larger as well. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I would also say you want at least 1 or 2 larger eye-catching pieces, something that maybe that's not in their price range, but that's going to really wow them, having it my friend Adam always has like this giant sculpture that he has. He always has like one big piece that he's probably not going to sell at the show, but if he does, wow. But you know, again, having something that has a good presence, but also to address the other thing is you really can't tell. And just because, like, as far as a show being good or bad for you in particular, a lot of the reviews on Art Fair Reviews and some of the other Facebook groups and things, and even from word of mouth, the truth of the matter is that everyone has their own medium. And so if you're all the reviews are, for example, like I mean, I'm a painter, so maybe that's not obvious, but I'm also not a traditional painter. So if I even get a review and it's another painter, if they do well at a show, it does not mean that I will. So sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and try a show. And I've discovered something I thought was really, really strange is that I always assumed that if you get into the show, the best shows, like the Clayton Art Show, like the Des Moines, like the Lakefront and all the big shows that they talk about all around the country, that means I'm going to have great sales and that's going to translate for me. But honestly, it doesn't. It doesn't for me. Now it might for a lot of people, but it really does just depend on the demographics and like who is buying, because a lot of the bigger shows, they're expecting to get the higher end artists, but then they don't really realize that they don't have the higher end budgets in their communities, or that, or who knows, maybe they didn't do enough advertising, or there's all kinds of things. So, I mean, trying a show, keeping an eye on like things like if that show has a new director, sometimes that plays a big part in things. But a lot of it is risk. I mean, I have done shows where it's like the best show. Everyone talks about it. You get into this show, you're going to do amazing. And I come home and I'm like, I could have done a local show and done just as well. I've also come home with a, $1,000 loss because I, had all my expenses and traveling and I didn't sell anything because I couldn't, but again, having different price points is important. But for a painter like me, I can't sell reproductions at some shows. So that means I can't bring cards, I can't bring prints, I can't bring anything like reproductions at all. And if the market that they have isn't, if the demographics can't hold up to that level of like buying an original painting, it just isn't going to work out. So kind of keeping those kinds of things in mind too, and being as broad as you can and trying to increase your potential market.
I agree with having a big piece that's a big impressive piece to draw people in. I usually put in my booth, I'll try to put like a lamp or something that's on a really high end piece. And I put it at the back of the booth in the center. So when people walk by, they're going to see that. And that also draws them into your booth. And you'd be surprised. Some of the times I think, oh, nobody's going to pay that for that. That's I'm probably putting too much on it, but oh well. But then you have the person who appreciates that, and they kind of appreciate the fact that if you value your art, they'll value it too. There's that don't undercut yourself because you think, well, nobody's going to buy it for that. You've got to value it for them to be able to value it. So
yeah, there's a perceived value for sure. So if you are undercutting your prices or you're just a little bit scared about going up, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard from artists who I'm like, you are not charging enough. You need to charge more. And they're like, I don't know. I'm afraid. I don't want to. And then the next time they're like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm charging more and I've made more sales, because there is a perceived value. If you're only charging $10 for a print, the person's like, well, I don't know, maybe it's not worth it. Like maybe you're getting what you pay for.
Yeah. Don Kelly, he's a jewelry artist with Best Missouri Hands. And he told me once that he goes up 10% in his price every year, no matter what. And I was like, what? But, everybody has different formulas and stuff like that. But definitely, I would get out there and kind of see, like Molly said, if yours is a lot cheaper than everybody else's in the show, people might be avoiding you because they're like, I don't know, so you want to kind of be in range with everybody else, but you've got to charge what is right for you too. So
And if you're not sure how to price,
I'd say,
stock the show. Go online, see who was showing last year,
Mhm.
look up their website. If they're doing something at all relevant to you, go to their website, see what their prices look like.
I would tell you what, it seems to me like we need to have a part 2 of this conversation, because I think we've got all kinds of things that we can cover here and
Yeah.
stuff. So, but before we go, does anybody have a question that they want to have addressed? Because we don't want to leave you hanging. If, like Greg and Barbara, I know you guys are newer to the shows. Lainey, I'm not sure how long you've been doing shows or not, but if you guys have a question you want to throw out there, now is a good time to do it.
I'm just planning on stalking everybody at Queenie.
Yes. Yes,
There you go.
that is a good idea. That's a good idea.
And
I
I
will
will
tell you
say-
what, my first time that I got into Queenie, I was just like overjoyed. I mean, I finally got into what I consider a big show, a nice show and stuff. Well, at the time, I do no cards, and I had the spinner racks, whatever. And so I was really excited at the end of the show. And I mean, I did, great on sales. I was happy. At the end of the show, I don't know if you guys know Vic Barr, but he was one of the show directors, and he kind of a gruff man and stuff. And he came up and I said, "Oh man, I'm so excited. Thanks. I was tickled to be in the show." And I keep trying to do harder and better and blah, blah, blah and stuff. And I said, I'm wanting to continue to improve. And he said, "Well, good, because their booth looked like a damn drugstore." And it was like a gut punch to me, because here, I mean, I've spent all this money, to get my booth this nice and everything. And it really, I don't get the air taken out of me very easily. And he did, because I mean, I remember people coming up and saying things to me afterwards during breakdown and all this stuff. And I couldn't talk to him because I was going to cry. And I hate to cry unless I really need to. But so, I mean, I couldn't say nothing to anybody. And for like a couple weeks, I was devastated. And finally I said, okay, this is serious. This is what I want to do for my living. How can I improve? How can I keep getting better? And I gradually did that. I had my card racks hand built by Jay Phillips, built me card racks and stuff. So the next time I was better for a year or two. And then I went to a different display, which looks even nicer. So I keep improving slowly and slowly, but don't let criticism and stuff like that wipe you out. Take it and say, hey, who cares? That guy's, an idiot. Or you take it and grow from it. And that's what I did. I took it and I grew from it, even though his words were devastating to me at the time. And that they really did help me to take a step back and say, looking at all these other artists, my booth does look like a drugstore. I've got 3 big spinning racks. I had over 300 varieties of cards with me, and now I have, I don't know what my booth holds now, 60 or 70 or something like that, but they're displayed, and I can sell more sales with just fewer cards than I ever did with the bigger racks and stuff like that. So like they were saying earlier, less is better, doing that nice presentation, taking the time, and, so, but yeah, stalk the art shows, talk to the artist, they're willing to help you.
Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and your participation and all the helpful ideas that have been provided by every one of you and the good questions that have been raised. And, feel free to reach out through the Facebook group or to any of us individually if you've got more questions as you begin your journey in either setting up for the first time or improving on your preparing for art fairs.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Ask anything you want. Yeah, ask anything you want in the Best Missouri Hands member only page. If you got questions that you're like, hey, I wish we would have covered this or something, feel free to jump on there and, somebody will help you out. So I wish everybody a fantastic show season. And like I said, maybe we'll have a part 2 to this because it was an interesting conversation. So appreciate everybody's help today. Have a wonderful day. Have a great show season, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Happy spring.
Bye.